thank you very much all for coming. Of course, there are so many friends that I will not end very quickly if I am going to mention everybody. Now, my task is both difficult and easy. Here, this is not only a social gathering, certainly it is because there are so many great people, but it's also a presentation of a book. Now, the easy task of mine is to speak about the book. The most difficult one will be to speak about the author of the book. And the two are intertwined because this is a biography and an autobiography as such. So how can you make it to speak only, not only, but most about the book and not about the author? Impossible, but I will try. Now, as you know, this is a most interesting book. And despite what you may believe that it's just a translation of the previous book, έτσι θα γίνεις έστω και αν δεν είσαι, κάπως ήταν ο τίτλος ο ελληνικός, but what we are interested in is Destiny Prevails, is the title of the English book, and I wanted to stress that this is not just a translation, it's almost a new book with new pages, new photographs, new data, new documentation. So I'm trying to entice you, to induce you into reading the English book. Now, it's an important book, important for both those who are of Greek descent, certainly, but also those who are Philhellenes or students of the Greek reality. It's a book that spans from the occupation, the Nazi occupation, the resistance against the Nazis, certainly what happened in the mountains of Greece, and certainly what happened in the Middle East as Greece in exile was preparing to resist and certainly return to a free Greece. And then not only that, the book spans over some very important chapters of Greek life, for instance, the creation of a national world-renowned airliner, and of course the creation of an important major public benefit foundation, the Onassis Foundation. Now, it is difficult to speak about the book, as I said, without speaking about the author of the book, since it is an autobiography, but the task is made easy by the fact that the author himself is an austere, humble, Doric, I would say, personality, who has deliberately, I would say naturally, instinctively given the same form to his book. Don't be deceived by the simple, austere, Doric style of the book. It is a more substantial one. Now, as I was coming, and now I come, that was the end of my remarks with regard to the book and the personality of the author. But as I was coming, I was thinking about the crisis. This is the central question that torments our minds, the crisis, the international crisis, and certainly the crisis in Greece. And I was thinking, having read the book 3 times, once in Greek and 2 times in English, having having worked, having the happiness to work with the author of the book for the last 14 years, I was thinking, I was putting myself the question, can one person make really a difference in a society in crisis, especially in Greece? And then I was thinking about the book, about what the book says for difficult chapters of Greek life, of Greece, and the answer that I gave myself was a resounding, categorical yes. Aristotle Onassis was one person. He was able to really propel Greece to stratospheric heights in terms of economic, social, goodwill, if you want, heights internationally. He was himself who created a fleet, or a huge fleet of ships. He was himself who monopolized for so many years the international scene. He was himself who envisioned the creation of the most important public funding foundation. Now, one person. Then there were a handful of persons who pick up this dream, this vision, and the most difficult will, and they made it possible. This handful of people, I was happy to meet most of them. 3 of them mainly, there were some others, but 3 of them were Stelios Papadimitriou, the late president of the Ioannidis Foundation, Apostolos Ambellas, and of course, Pavlos Ioannidis, the vice president emeritus of our foundation and the author of the book. Despite any adversity, any complication about the will, with the belief in what the creator of the foundation wanted to do, they managed to make it a reality. They managed to make it a reality which gave to not only Greece, but so many other countries in the world, hospitals, cultural centers, thousands of scholarships, grants all over, the support of so many centers of Hellenic studies throughout the world, Latin America, North America, Europe, Asia. But this handful of people, which indeed made a difference in difficult times, had a secret that I always remember when I hear, for instance, the legend of the γεφύρι της Άρτας, the bridge of Arta. Ο λιμερείς το χτίζανε, τη νύχτα γκρεμιζόταν. Every day they were trying to build the bridge, and every night the bridge was collapsing. And then what they had to do? The chief engineer had to bury his wife into the foundation. Or if you want, what he had most dear, most important for them. That's of course a metaphor, and we all know that nothing can be built, nothing really can go ahead and be productive if you don't build in it your best self. And that's exactly what this handful of people who made the difference did. They built in the Onassis Foundation their best selves. That if I try to take the whole span of the book that we are presenting today, that's what the author of the book did during his whole life. He abandoned, during the Nazi occupation, the comfort of his home and the capital, and he went into the mountains to fight against the occupier. He abandoned Greece to go to the Middle East and work for the resistance. He enlisted into the Air Force and became a fighter pilot. And then, as one of the closest advisors of Aristotle Onassis, he was the one who helped him to create Olympic Airways, one of the most important, as we know very well, during those times, airlines of the world. And of course, he was the one who, together with Stelios Papadimitriou and Apostolos Zabellas, made the wonderful reality of a major public benefit foundation a possibility that gave so many good, wonderful perspectives to the whole world, the ones that I mentioned. I finished. I just simply wanted to tell you that the answer is yes. One person, a handful of persons can make the difference. The author of the book, Pavlos Ioannidis, the vice president of our foundation, the vice president emeritus, is one of these very few who made the difference. For this, personally, I would like to thank him. I certainly cannot speak but on behalf of the Ioannidis Foundation USA and of course the Parent Foundation, because I'm a member of the board of the Parent Foundation. I would like to thank him on behalf of the foundation. I want to thank him for this book and something really important which denotes what I said, that he put, as our president, Anthony Papadimitriou, wrote in the preface of his book, he put his flesh and blood, metaphorically, into this effort. The little thing that denotes that is that he took the trip for all of you, for the book, and he crossed the Atlantic. He didn't even know on Monday whether he would be able to make it, and he took this trip, he took the risk, and he came to meet you all, and to speak to you about his book. So I thank him even for that. Thank you very much. And you have
Your Eminence, Honorable Ambassadors, Consul General, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Aristotle Socrates Onassis was born in Smyrna, Asia Minor, in 1906. Aristotle Onassis' main attribute was his courage. He showed courage in his personal and social life, as well as in his business ventures. He was a visionary with a very strong intuition. An affable and charismatic man. He had such a positive aura that he could make his interlocutor feel completely at ease, regardless of nationality, religion, race, education, or financial status. He could, however, become short-tempered and fight for his right to the very end, when he realized that he was being wronged. Following the tragic death of his son Alexander, he displayed his deep humanitarian side when he decided to give half of his fortune to public benefit projects in the areas of health, education, culture, environment, and social solidarity. Since late 1974, Onassis had been suffering from myasthenia gravis, an incurable neuromuscular disease that gradually paralyzes the muscles. Despite his unimaginable discomfort, he faced his disease with great courage and patience. Aristotle Onassis died on March 15, 1975, at the American hospital in Paris. He was buried at the Panagos Chapel on the island of Skorpios. When his legal counselor, Stelios Papadimitriou, once asked him, "What do you wish us to do for you, Mr. Onassis?" he replied, "Keep my business running. I am the business." Onassis personally appointed the executives of his will and the lifetime members of a board of directors for the Onassis Foundation that was set up to carry out his instructions. I was one of them. Christina disagreed her father's last will and testament right from the start. She demanded her entire share without any limitation whatsoever. Onassis had known this disagreement and had tried to convince her that the will would shield her from future risks. However, Christina was adamant and the situation reached an impasse. The Onassis Foundation was formed only after satisfying her demands, which were contrary to what was provided for in the will. The foundation would not have been created any other way. After Onassis' will was made public, there were certain reactions and adverse comments concerning not only the provision of the will, but also serious doubts as to the capability of his three closest collaborators, Stelios Papadimitriou, Apostolos Zambellas, and myself, to successfully manage and run the commercial entity of his estate. Many predicted we would fail. In the following years, various slanderous rumors and accusations continued to circulate, saying that the financial administration and management of the foundation and the estate of Christina were not diligent. These rumors were mainly spread by Athena's father, Thierry Roussel. His ultimate goal was to seize his daughter's fortune. After Athena came of age, a serious dispute reopened between her and her father regarding the management of her estate. This dispute ended up before a London court and was subsequently resolved by an out-of-court settlement. Roussel then resigned as administrator of the estate, but reportedly only after Athena paid him a huge amount of money. As a result of this dispute, it is worth noting that Athina did not even invite her father on her wedding. My greatest motivation in writing this book was my desire to record the details of some events involving the Onassis family that were up to now unknown or which were not known to the wider public, as I experienced them in my life and which relate to Aristotle Onassis as businessman and as a private individual, his children, Alexander and Christina, who both died tragically before their time, and his daughter Athina. Certain unknown aspects of Aristotle Onassis' will and the problems that arose in regard to the establishment of the Alexandrias Onassis Foundation. The serious problems that were created due to the unethical and unreasonable demands made by Thierry Roussel, father of Athina, both prior and after the death of Christina Onassis. Highlights of the history of Olympic Airways. The long-standing dispute between the administrators of Christina Onassis estate and Thierry Roussel, as well as the Swiss authorities. Being 56 years with the Onassis Group and a close advisor and friend of Onassis family for a long number of years, I'm the last living person that experienced these events from the inside, and I wanted to write down the real facts exactly as they happened and the reason why they happened. Many stories have been said and many rumors have been spread around all these years, which do not reflect the truth. The book also offers a narrative of my personal memoirs and experiences from World War II until today. Finally, I thank God for granting me health, courage, and the spiritual endurance to make it through such an interesting journey, along with the opportunity to test myself in good as well as bad times. Concluding, I wish to extend my warmest thanks to all of you, and particularly to Ambassador TSILAS, Mr. Antonis Diamantaris, Dr. DODY, and to our host, Nikos Papakonstantinou, Director of the Greek Press and Communication Office. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. After that, the next speaker, as we usually say, needs no introduction, is a dearest friend, and of course the publisher of the only daily, Greek American Daily. And next to him and after him will be Professor TSIANTAR, who is very intimately familiar with the book. She helped to edit the book and she will talk to us about the book.
Σεβασμιότατε, κύριε Πρέσβη της Ελλάδας στα Ηνωμένα Έθνη, κύριε Γενικέ Πρόξενο της Ελλάδας, διακεκριμένοι κύριοι και κυρίες, αγαπητοί φίλοι, δέχτηκα με μεγάλη χαρά την πρόταση του παλιού μου καλού φίλου, του πρέσβη Λουκά Τσίλα, να μιλήσω για τον συγγραφέα Παύλο Ιωαννίδη για τον εξής λόγο. Γιατί με έχει εντυπωσιάσει η προσωπικότητα και το συγγραφικό ταλέντο του. Στα 34 χρόνια που έχω την τιμή να είμαι ο εκδότης του Εθνικού Κήρυγα, όπως καταλαβαίνετε είχα την ευκαιρία να γνωρίσω πολλούς ανθρώπους. Λίγοι όμως με εντυπωσίασαν τόσο όσο ο Παύλος Ιωαννίδης. Από την πρώτη στιγμή που τον είδα, και νομίζω ότι ήταν στα γραφεία, τα παλιά γραφεία του Εθνικού Κήρυγα, πριν αρκετά χρόνια, αντιλήφθηκα ότι πρόκειται για μια σημαντική, αυθεντική προσωπικότητα. Τον χαρακτηρίζει η πίστη και ευγνωμοσύνη στο μεγάλο αφεντικό και φίλο του, τον αείμνηστο Αριστοτέλη Ωνάση και την οικογένειά του. Τον χαρακτηρίζει η ευγένεια, η συνέπεια του λόγου η αξιοπρέπεια. Όχι αυτονόητα πράγματα πλέον στην εποχή μας. Είναι ένας κύριος, ένας εκπρόσωπος μιας λαμπρής γενιάς των Ελλήνων, από την οποία πολλοί έχουμε φεληθεί και πολλά έχουμε να μάθουμε, εμείς οι νεότεροι. Κυρίες και κύριοι, όταν πληροφορήθηκα ότι ο Παύλος έγραψε βιβλίο, ζήτησα από το γραφείο μου στην Αθήνα να μου το στείλουν αμέσως. Το διάβασα μέσα σε μια εβδομάδα. Τόσο πολύ μου άρεσε. Φίλοι και φίλες, λέγεται συχνά ότι τα καλύτερα ιστορικά βιβλία δεν τα γράφουν οι ιστορικοί. Ένα τέτοιο παράδειγμα αποτελεί το βιβλίο του στρατηγού Μακρυγιάννη. Ένα άλλο παράδειγμα αποτελεί το βιβλίο του Παύλου Ιωαννίδη, «Και αν δεν είσαι, θα γίνεις». Και στην αγγλική του μετάφραση Destiny Prevails. Πρόκειται για ένα βιβλίο που έπρεπε να γραφεί, γιατί περιέχει ένα κομμάτι της πρόσφατης ελληνικής ιστορίας. Περιέχει πολλά νέα στοιχεία για τον Ωνάση, από έναν άνθρωπο που τον έζησε από κοντά. Προβαίνει σε σημαντικές αποκαλύψεις για την Ολυμπιακή αεροπορία. Παρουσιάζει τα τραγικά γεγονότα που σημάδεψαν τη ζωή των παιδιών του Ωνάση, όπως τα έζησε ο Παύλος Ioannidis από κοντά. Εξηγεί τον αγώνα που ο ίδιος και λίγα αλλά ανώτατα στελέχη των εταιριών του Ωνάση έδωσαν για να τιμήσουν την τελευταία επιθυμία του, για τη δημιουργία αυτού που εξελίχθηκε στο σπουδαίο φιλανθρωπικό ίδρυμα που φέρει το όνομα του Αλεξάνδρου Ωνάση. Και έκανε επίσης άριστα που το μετέφρασε στην αγγλική με τη βοήθεια της DODY, παλιάς μου φίλης, για να διαβαστεί πλατύτερα. Κλείνω με μια πράξη του Παύλου Ιωαννίδη που την θεωρώ πραγματικά αποκαλυπτική του χαρακτήρα και της φιλοσοφίας βάσει της οποίας πιστεύω ότι έχει ζήσει τη ζωή του. Ο βασιλιάς της Αγγλίας το απένει με το παράσημο για ανδραγαθία, για τον ηρωισμό του Παύλου κατά τη διάρκεια του Δευτέρου Παγκοσμίου Πολέμου. Όταν όμως οι Εγγλέζοι κρέμασαν τον Μιχάλη Καραολή και τον Ανδρέα Δημητρίου, ο Παύλος Ιωαννίδης τους το επέστρεψε ως, σε εισαγωγικά, στερούμενο πλέον οποιασδήποτε αξίας. Κλείνοντας εισαγωγικά. Δεν το άντεχε η συνείδησή του, η αξιοπρέπειά του, η εθνική του υπερηφάνεια, η αντιμότητά του. Να γιατί θεωρώ τον Παύλο Ιωαννίδη μια σημαντική προσωπικότητα, αλλά και ένα σημαντικό συγγραφέα της εποχής μας. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Did you turn it? Can you hear me? Hi, good evening. Your Eminence, Ambassador TSILAS, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, Mr. Ioannidis, friends, thank you for being here for the presentation of this book. I, perhaps more than anyone, except with the exception of Mr. Ioannidis, have intimate knowledge of this book. We've worked on it for a long time together. I got involved in the book about a year ago as a representative of Livanis USA, the publisher of the book in Greece. I represent the publisher here, and my business partner, Nikki Yorgato, and I got involved together when the publishers came to us to get this ready for the American market. It had been translated, but it needed a going through. So I took it from the top and edited the book along chapter by chapter, sending it to my colleague who looked at it in Greek against the original book, and then we would send it back to Mr. Ioannidis, chapter by chapter. We'd go through the process. He'd send us corrections. We'd send them back. We'd go back and forth, back and forth. He's very meticulous. Working on these projects, we got to know him really well. He amazed both of us with his stamina, his memory, and his meticulous attention to detail. I can confess as a witness, not a comma escaped him. I would miss typos, he'd catch them. He's amazing. When I went to Athens last spring to work with him to finish up the final text of the book to give it to the printers, we sat in a room with no windows for about 8 hours, right? He never complained that he was tired or hungry. I beat him to it, and I'm 40 years his junior. I needed food. But we got through it 2 days in a row, or maybe a week apart. I believe, though, that through this process, we created a much better book, I think, than the one he had originally written. There's more here, there's more detail here, there's more documentation, and it's easy to read in English. It almost reads like a novel, almost. I want to go over some of the highlights of the book. I don't want to take it away from you because I'd like you to read it yourselves, but I want to give you enough to entice you to read it. And I hope you'll agree with me, but by the time I'm finished, that you'll realize that Mr. Ioannidis has led a remarkable, an extraordinary life, and his book is really well worth the time to read it. Destiny Prevails, a different title than it was in Greek, ANTONIS, is a long book. It's about 500 plus pages. It's chronologically told. It's not a literary memoir, it's a literal one. It's told chronologically, and it's fully documented. But his life is so extraordinary and so interesting that it's worth the plunge through 500 pages. Let me start at the beginning. It's basically divided into about 5 parts. For those of you that have read it already, forgive me, bear with me. For those of you that haven't, I hope it's just enough to give you a taste to want you to read it. Mr. Ioannidis was born on February the 22nd, 1924 in Berlin, and that's where the book opens. His father, a doctor, took the family to Greece 6 months later after Mr. Ioannidis' mother passed away, took them back to Greece. Ioannidis, from his own telling, from his memoir, was a lanky, tall, and rambunctious child. His height made him stand out, but so did his behavior. He was a little naughty, right? Yeah. He often got into trouble with school authorities. He loved the sea and dreamed of becoming a ship captain. His father, a doctor, was entwined in some legal troubles with his siblings, tried to keep the family afloat, and one day, as he describes it in his book, ended up smacking the judge involving the case with an umbrella. I said, so it's little wonder where Mr. Ioannidis has gotten his feistiness from. He also inherited his father's deep-held beliefs for freedom and justice. His father was a Cypriot, loved his homeland deeply, and was involved in the struggle to gain independence from the British. A bust of his father is in Engomi Square in Nicosia. So it's a little surprise then that Mr. Ioannidis reacted really vehemently to the German occupation of Greece. And in 1942, he decided to flee the mountains to join the resistance despite his father's demands that he stay put. He even sold his bicycle for pocket money. The book takes us up into the mountains with him, through the snow, into the caves. We really see the struggle. And for me, it was that was almost my favorite part of the book because my mother's story is similar, so I really could relate to what he was writing about. He divulges a story about the Gorgopotamos Dam that was how it wasn't blown up, that's never been revealed before. So there's historical material here that has never been printed, was unveiled, revealed in this book. Then he goes on a mission to Cairo in May 1944 for the resistance, and he and his colleagues end up spending the night in Eritrea due to a roadblock. And that night, their hostess reads his coffee cup. Those of us that are Greek knows that we read our fortunes in our coffee cups. And as she read it, she looked at him and said, "You are a pilot." And he says, no, I'm not. She's like, yes, you are. Demanded that he was. Then she says, you'll become one then. That's where the original Greek title comes from, Antonis Ioannidis. And that's where destiny prevailed comes from. And sure enough, destiny did prevail. In Cairo, he met someone who offered him a spot in the Royal Air Force. And that's how he became a fighter pilot, from ship captain to fighter pilot. But even his stint with the Royal Air Force isn't merely just a blip in this man's biography. He was trained in Rhodesia. We read about his training with his run-ins with elephants and rhinos, and he has a near accident. He comes up out of the river covered in muck because his propeller plane had stumbled. I think it was on takeoff, if I remember the details right. His memory's better than mine. On his return to Greece, he eventually left the military and entered civil aviation. He became the youngest pilot at TAE, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Greece's first post-war passenger airline. But the airline had trouble. It was having financial problems. And word spread quickly that it was likely to be bought by an outsider. On the flight to Cairo in April of 1956, Mr. Ioannidis met the outsider for the first time, Aristotle Onassis. His life was never the same after that fateful moment. He writes, I can't remember who stuck out his hand first, him or me. I shook his hand and immediately loosened my grip because his hand was as soft as dough. It was a big shock for me because he looked so powerful as he stood across from me. That was our first and only handshake, he wrote. That's an example of like the type of details, how you get to know Mr. Onassis, the man, because this man sitting next to us knew him, worked with him. They got to know each other so well, eventually he began to fly for Olympic, and he spent the next 50 years at the service of the family, Onassis' companies, and the foundation that was created in his son's name. With candor and remarkable recollection of details, Mr. Ioannidis tells us what it was like to work so closely with him. We learn stories about the legendary Onassis. Some of us may know some of them already. Others you'll read it for the first time. For example, he describes, I had never read this, and I love this anecdote. He said he wanted to use the 5 Olympic rings on the airplane, on the air carrier. And he was at a meeting, and the government tells him, they relay the information to Mr. Onassis that the International Olympic Committee has the copyright, can't use 5 rings. And he looked at them and said, so we'll use 6. So what's the problem? He said the room remained silent, was stunned. He also writes and unveils how Olympic became a world-renowned airline in its glory, all its turbulent history. And if you're interested in labor management issues, it's a textbook in how certain labor disputes can be resolved. Fascinating reading. As a pilot at Olympic and eventually the director of the airline, and as one of Mr. Onassis' trusted advisors, Mr. Ioannidis obviously met very many VIPs. He was at the cockpit, flying many of them for Olympic. He flew Spiro Agnew when he went for his first time back to Greece. He was at the controls for Patriarch Athenagoras when he met with the Pope. And he was often at the controls for flights that were taken by the Greek royal family. He describes a riveting chapter of a time when he took the royal family to Kavala in December of 1967 to where they attempted a coup to overthrow the junta. It didn't work. They came back to the plane, and in bad weather, he had to fly them out of the country, and they went to Italy, where he was stuck for a while. He was also in the cockpit, and this part, now, as we were working on this chapter by chapter, I had to keep telling myself that I wanted to make this book interesting for American audiences as well. I know what Americans like. They like the juicy stuff, and I tried to press him, and he resisted. But we got a little bit, and for example, he talks about one day when he's at the plane at the controls taking a flight with Onassis and Maria Callas. It's the first time he meets her. They go on a flight to Crete to look at real estate, I believe, because he wanted to develop a hotel, or if I remember it right. Mr. Ioannidis writes, they both looked very cheerful. Maria Callas in particular looked as if she was overwhelmed with happiness. He invited her to the cockpit and said she was very friendly and eager to learn more about flying and a pilot's profession and posed some very sharp and pointed questions. He was impressed with her, calling her self-confident, very polite, and glowing with happiness. I liked that, but I pressed him a little more. Eventually, he called me a couple days later. He says, I have a letter. I said, what kind of a letter? He goes, let me read it to you. And it was a letter written from Maria Callas to Aristotle Onassis in English. It was a birthday present to Aristo. It was written in English, and it's complete in the back of the book, in the appendix. It said, Aristo, my love, this is not a child's letter. This is a hurt, tired, proven woman that gives you the most fresh and youthful sentiments ever felt. Never forget that, and always be tender with me as you have been on these days, and you make me the queen of the world. I am yours. Do as you will with me. Your soul, Maria. He delivered what I was looking for. So when we came to Jackie, I pushed again. So I take credit for this, because I kind of made him do this. He called her a very elegant and aristocratic woman, a real lady. But he also adds that he didn't think her concern was always as genuine as it seemed. Here too, Mr. Ioannidis produced a letter dated April 1968. It was a thank you note from Jackie written to Aristotle, thanking him for a cruise that he had taken her and her kids on to Nassau. Onassis had proved to be a very discreet friend to her after the death of the president, and this trip was offered as an escape from the pressure. It was during Robert Kennedy's run for office. And the letter is effused with thanks. All your care, Ari, to make it carefree for me, how can I thank you for that? She shares a letter from Jack Kennedy with him about Jack Kennedy's love of the sea. Really good material that none of us ever knew this. The tone of the letter is courteous and warm, but if you read between the lines, you can kind of tell she's a little smitten with Ari's lifestyle. So I cite 2 points for Mr. Ioannidis. He came through twice for me. During his years at Olympic, we also read how he gets even more intimately involved and has a strong relationship with members of the family. He was particularly close to Aristotle's son, Alexander, who oversaw the operation of Olympic while Mr. Ioannidis was the director of the airline. It's clear from his account, and several photographs, you've probably seen them as the slideshow was going, that he felt very fondly for Alexander. They were bound by a common passion for flying, and very often when he talks of him, you can tell he loved him like a son. His description of him is honest and affectionate. He says he was very human, daring to the point of being reckless. He calls him a diamond in the rough. He also relays a little-known story of how Alexander flew to Carpathos in bad weather one night to help rescue a fisherman whose hand had been blown off by dynamite. The boy's father insisted on giving him money, and Alexander proudly showed it off the next day to anyone who would listen, because it was the first money he'd ever actually earned. Great anecdote. Again, I think I helped you remember that one. He was also almost on the fateful flight that took Alexander's life. They were supposed to test a new pilot, but Alexander got there early and went up without him. The plane crashed. Alexander was critically injured, and he died several days later. And Mr. Ioannidis was there when Mr. Onassis came into the room. You're that close to that many intimate moments in this man's life. He said he saw him cross himself before he opened the door. Very revealing moment. As we were working on the chapter, I couldn't help, I'm a journalist, so I can't help but ask questions. So I asked Mr. Ioannidis, I said, well, how did you feel? You were supposed to be on that plane. I expected him to say, God, I was lucky. That's not how he answered. And then he wrote it in the book. He answered that if I had been at the controls, it wouldn't have happened, because if I'd been in the cockpit, I'm so methodical a pilot, he was so confident, that he says there's a very good chance I would have caught the mechanical mistake. I was really impressed with that. He was so self-assured that he would have been able to, perhaps, maybe it wouldn't have happened if he had been there. Alexander's death is a controversial subject, and he talks about how many people raised questions about it. In his view, he believed it was a mechanical problem that wasn't caught due to human error. He spends a lot of pages in the book talking about this. He also takes you and talks us through the details of Aristotle's death, his funeral on Skorpios, how the island's residents lined up to pay their respects to him. We read about the frosty relationship between Christina and Jackie and how it played out at the funeral. And for the first time, we see a photograph of Onassis' tomb, never before been published. We find out how Onassis wrote his will by hand on an airplane. Copy of the will's in the back of the book. And he describes how he became one of the few executors of the estate, and then talks about his relationship, which Mr. Ioannidis himself talked about, the dispute that happened afterwards with Christina. His relationship with Christina wasn't quite as affectionate as it was with Alexander, but he's close to her and also would give her fatherly advice, and she would ask for it many, many times. But he often, at least I got the senses from reading and working with him, he seemed frustrated by her impulsiveness, and he clearly calls her self-destructive. But when she dies unexpectedly in Argentina in 1988, it's Mr. Ioannidis who flies to Buenos Aires to bring her back to Greece. This man knew this family very, very well. And the saga of the family, the tragedy of the family is told here in loving and really meticulous detail. The battle over his estate between Terry Roussel, her husband, and the father of Onassis' only living heir, Athena, is described in complete detail, spares no detail, letters, transcripts, testimony, everything there is to document the battle so that you can make your own minds up about and he doesn't stop there. We also find out about the establishment of the foundation, the building and the backstory of the Onassis Cardiac Center, and we get a glimpse of his own personal interactions with Athena and the family that raised her. A lot of the book is so documented that it's hard to put down. Photographs you'll see in it that haven't been published before. It's a story of the family from someone who knows them intimately, who lived through their tragedies and triumphed alongside them. But it's also the story of a very courageous man who deeply held on to his principles and integrity and dignity with grace, and has lived a life by any account is extraordinary. Destiny has indeed prevailed. What the fortune teller told him so many years ago came true. He did become a pilot, but he became that and so, so much more. I want to end a note with just a personal thanks from me to him for allowing me the privilege of working with him on this book. It was fun, it was enlightening, and I'm proud of what we accomplished. Let me also express my thanks on behalf of the publishers of the book to the Greek Press Office, Mr. Papakostandino, Mr. TSILAS, the staff of the Onassis Foundation, Pamela, for putting it together this wonderful evening. Thanks so much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the book.
May I thank the distinguished speakers, of course, the author of the book. Your Eminence, we will be really honored if you want to bless us or give us your wise words.
Είμαι εκτός προγράμματος, όπως βλέπετε. Είναι λίγο σαν γι' αυτό που λένε για ένα γεγονός special appearance by some anonymous. Κύριε αξιότιμε και σημαντικότατε κύριε Ιωαννίδη, κύριε Πρέσβη, κύριε Τσίλα, κύριε Διαμαντάρη, Dr. TSIANTAR, κύριε Πρέσβης, κύριε Γενικέ Πρόξενε, κύριε Παπακοσταντίνου υπεύθυνε, κύριε Commander, I didn't see him before, εκλεκτοί προσκεκλημένοι. Απόψε είχαμε μια πολύ ειδική ευκαιρία να χαρούμε στα ελληνικά και στα αγγλικά πολύ ενδιαφέροντα πράγματα. Ο κύριος Ιωαννίδης με εξέπληξε με την συντομία της παρουσιάσεώς του. Υποτίθεται ότι είναι ο κύριος ομιλητής, αλλά ο κύριος Ιωαννίδης υπήρξε λακωνικός και πάρα πολύ μετρημένος. Αλλά αυτό κρύβει έναν τεράστιο πλούτο. Οι εισαγωγές που έγιναν και από τον κύριο Τσίλα και από τον κύριο Διαμαντάρη στα ελληνικά, μια ωραιότατη παρουσίαση, και and Dr. Tsandar presented something of a analysis of a text and a person. You really presented the biography of Mr. Ioannidis in a very eloquent way.
Thank you.
You spoke about some juicy things you said.
I did.
It's, as you say, the American way of doing things, not so laconic, not so Doric, more to the Corinthian style. Το γεγονός ότι ο αείμνηστος Αριστοτέλης Ωνάσης επέλεξε έναν άνθρωπο σαν τον κύριο Ιωαννίδη για άμεσο σύμβολο και συνεχιστή του έργου του δείχνει την ευφυΐα του ανθρώπου. Δεν ήταν απλώς ένας πολύ καλός επιχειρηματίας, ένας πρωτοφανούς εντάσεως και εκτάσεως και ποιότητας επιχειρηματίας, ήξερε να διαλέγει ανθρώπους. Όπως στην περίπτωση του κ. Ιωαννίδη, κ. Παπαδημητρίου. Εγώ προσωπικά έχω αναμνήσεις παλιές. Μου θυμίσετε, Dr. Chandra, you remind me of the transition from the TAE Air Company. It was another one at the same time, TSILAS, if I remember correctly. And then here comes Aristoteles Onassis, who creates the Olympic Airways. And I remember when we were young, people would say, what's going to happen now? Well, what happened is an amazing development of an air company, which unfortunately is not functioning at this point. At this point, I emphasize that, because it's unthinkable that you don't have a direct connection between Athens and New York during these months. It's unthinkable. So maybe we have to resurrect Onassis or someone like him to say, stop this talk about who owns, just make this a company, because it will be a thriving company. So many people traveling. Allow me to just not to go further, because I'm outside of the schedule and don't want to prolong the night, but mention two items. One was an anecdotal event on the day when the marriage of Onassis and Jacqueline Kennedy was announced. It so happened that in the evening of that day, I was visiting a close family here in New York, in a residence on Fifth Avenue. And the person, the concierge down there, was an African-American by the name of Moses. I knew him because I used to visit the family frequently. A very impressive concierge person. You know, there are some people like that, they are impressive. You think it's a pity that they are concierge. Could be something else. I said, good evening, Mr. Moses was the name. Good evening, Mr. Moses. Oh, hello, Bishop, he said. And congratulations, he tells me. I said, for what? The marriage of this fellow patriot of yours by the name of Aristotelis Onassis to the former First Lady. And he says to me in a very serious way, this Onassis is a high nobility. I say, Mr. Moses, Mr. Onassis is more than high on nobility. And nobility, you might have plenty of nobilities around, but you don't have many Onassis. No, he said. No, I don't mean what you think. I don't mean Onassis, the tycoon, he used the expression, the king of the oceans. Oh, I said. What do you mean? I said that. I say, is that the name Aristotle? I said, yes. Well, his ancestry goes 2,500 back, he said. Aristotle, a philosopher. I said, comes from the same family. This is nobility. So I kept this kind of anecdote as a very nice and interesting thing. The other thing with which I'm finishing is something that happened in a conference. It was a conference in Delphi. Some people from the humanities sections of the university, so we were there. Among them was a professor of physics, University of Athens, by the name of, if I may remember correctly, Anastasiadis, a person from Smyrna. So we were for 3 days in this conference. At that point, when I heard that he was from Smyrna, and I count the age, I said, must be contemporary with Onassis. I say, Professor Anastasiadis, you were in Smyrna, living at the time together with Onassis. He said, what are you talking? We were classmates. We were in the same school, in the same class, in fact. Could you really tell me something about Onassis? Πείτε μου κάτι για τον Ωνάση, το οποίο είναι άμεση πείρα, που δείχνει τι ακριβώς ήταν ο Onassis. Μου λέει, θα σας πω κάτι που είχε γίνει στη Σμύρνη. Είμαστε παιδιά, we were children, 4th grade. A fire erupted and happened in one of the places that were selling books and pencils and material for the students. Βιβλίο χαρτοπολείο της εποχής στην Ελλάδα. Μια πυρκαγιά δεν κάηκε. The whole thing was not burned. It was just escaped with a relatively small, he said, damages. Well, that was it. Not for Onassis. A kid in the 4th grade. He went there and he looked inside and immediately had a plan. He enters this place and says to the owner, I see here this side has been heavily damaged. Do you mind if I have what I have with me? It was just something limited in terms of coins, how much could have a child. I'll give you this, and I take these burned pencils. Of course, he said. So he takes the pencils, the whole side, because he saw that the pencils were burned just at the very end. Sits down and met him, xistra with a sharpener, does with every pencil. Next day comes to the school, he said, because the pencils were just almost not damaged, just apart. He said, I'm selling the pencils to the classmate and the other people in the school. Half the price. And you pay the full price for something a little bit more, just 1 inch more for something which is 12-inch long. Of course. Before we knew, he had sold everything. I said, thank you. That's, for me, it says what was the mind of this person. But then, of course, we followed the tragedies, the the death of Alexander, Mr. Ioannidis, was a big thing for us young people at that time. Goodness, I mean, the destiny of a family to suffer this type of thing. And then Christina and the court issues. And we are very thankful that in your book, as we discovered from the presentation, you saved not only autobiographical of your own story, which is a heroic story, but also of Aristoteles Onassis, who was really a glory for Greece. Sometimes I think that if he was alive today, things might have been different in Greece. But we pray that there will be some people that will follow on this way. Thank you again for bringing it to us. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you all. You honor us with your presence, and of course there is a reception that you may wish to join. Thank you.
Όλα το γράφετε με δύο λάμδα, όχι.
Όχι, με ένα. Φούντρα, φρό στο τέλος. Φούντρα, ρο.
Αλφα.
Όχι τώρα, ναι, αλφα. Θα το δείξω στο γιο μου, ο οποίος τότε ήταν 8, όταν είναι 35, θα θυμάται πάντα. Δεν βρίσκαμε θέση να έρθουμε στην Θεσσαλονίκη στο συνέδριο που έκανε η Νέα Δημοκρατία και το φθηνό σύζυγος. Και μου βρήκατε αμέσως, να είστε πάντα καλά. Πολύ στο το εξετίμησα.
My name is Cindy, C-I-N-D-Y.
Cindy.
C-I-N-D-Y, yes. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it.
Congratulations. Can we address this to the students of PS 122, Row for Peace? We are actually in the...
Yeah. I would like to row for peace.
Yes.